So I want to just talk to you for a second, because something happened in Cleveland this week that I genuinely did not expect to happen this fast, and I've been sitting with it for a couple days trying to figure out how to even frame it for you. This isn't a rumor. This isn't some hot take from a guy with a podcast and too much free time. This is a franchise in broad daylight, quietly walking away from the most expensive bet it has ever made on a single player. And I want to break down exactly how we got here, because once you see the full picture, it stops looking like a coaching decision and starts looking like something a lot more uncomfortable. Let's start with the headline, because it's a big one. Shedeur Sanders is stepping into command of that Cleveland offense. Not as insurance, not as a name they're floating to keep things interesting during a slow news week in July, as the guy they're building around right now, in real time. And the part that's making people around the league sit up isn't just that a rookie is getting this kind of runway this early. It's exactly who he's climbing past to get it. Deshaun Watson, a player this organization handed one of the richest contracts in the history of the sport. A player they restructured their entire roster philosophy around. And now quietly, without a press conference or a dramatic announcement, the front office is basically signaling that the guaranteed money doesn't buy the job anymore. Sit with that for a second, because that's not a small procedural update buried in a transaction report. That's an organization admitting in the most indirect way possible that the foundation they poured everything into cracked, and that raises the question I can't stop chewing on. Is this Cleveland finally being honest with itself after years of protecting a decision that clearly wasn't working? Or is this simply what happens when you run out of ways to justify the math? Because both of those explanations are sitting right there in plain view, and depending on who inside that building you ask, you're going to get a completely different answer. I want to bring you into this the way I experienced it, starting with someone who actually knows what that locker room feels like from the inside. Joe Haden didn't tiptoe around the subject when he was asked point blank about where Watson's future in Cleveland actually stands. He wasn't cruel about it, and he wasn't trying to stir anything up for attention. He was just telling you what he sees, plainly, the way a guy who's been in that building for years tells you what he sees. According to Haden, there really isn't a long runway left for Watson in Cleveland. He'd already watched the previous fill-in option get a chance last season and fizzle out without ever making anyone in that building believe he was the long-term piece. So when his attention shifted towards Shedeur instead, that wasn't some random guess thrown out to sound interesting on a show. That was a former player who's lived in that locker room, reading the room accurately, and telling you flat out that the rookie brings something this roster has been missing for a long time. And think about the resource commitment here too. Cleveland didn't stumble into Shedeur. They used a genuinely valuable draft asset to bring him in, and you don't spend a pick like that just to let him sit behind a quarterback whose long-term outlook was already shaky before he ever took a snap this season. Haden's read on this is refreshingly simple, honestly. Stop overthinking the politics of it. Hand the rookie the reps. Let him actually run the offense with real structure behind him and find out, once and for all, exactly what you have. Give him the shot that, in Haden's own eyes, Watson never fully justified after everything that's unfolded since that contract was signed. Now here's where I have to be honest with you, because somebody needs to say the quiet part out loud about Watson. This is a player Cleveland paid like he was going to single-handedly end a decade of quarterback instability. Guaranteed money, franchise-shifting money, the kind of number that's supposed to buy years of contending football and a locker room's full confidence. And what has that actually produced on the field? Inconsistent play that never found rhythm. Health problems stacking on top of each other until it became hard to remember what a healthy stretch even looked like. An offense that's looked stuck in mud far more often than it's looked dangerous. And then, to make it worse, an Achilles injury that reset the clock all over again just when there was supposed to be momentum building. And here's the part that genuinely stings if you're a Browns fan watching this unfold. This isn't just outside noise anymore. People online with opinions and nothing to lose by saying them. League evaluators, the people whose entire job is assessing talent without any emotional attachment to a name or a paycheck, have essentially reached the same conclusion in blunter language. Cleveland already knows exactly what they have, and it isn't good. It's not a give him more time situation. It's closer to this isn't working, and everybody paying attention already knows it. They're just waiting for the organization to say it out loud. Meanwhile, on the other side of this, you've got a young quarterback who hasn't proven a single thing in live NFL snaps yet, but who somehow carries a completely different energy around that building. The kind of presence that makes people inside the walls lean a certain direction before he's even played a down that actually counts. And when the veteran who's already burned through every advantage a struggling franchise can hand, a player still can't create separation from an unproven rookie in terms of belief and buzz inside the building, that tells you something real about where the ceiling actually sits for both of them. Watson had his run. He got the years. He got the guaranteed contract. He got every single resource a front office could possibly throw behind one player. And I genuinely don't know how you spin that return as anything other than disappointing at this point. So here's the real question hanging over Cleveland right now. What exactly are they still waiting for? How many more setbacks? How many more injury updates? How many more explanations does one player get before an organization is willing to admit the math simply isn't adding up anymore? Are they protecting a roster spot because it makes actual football sense? Or are they protecting a contract because admitting the mistake publicly is harder than just quietly moving past it? I want to pull you directly into part of this conversation, because honestly, it's more revealing than any outside analysis could ever be. When Hayden was pressed on the fact that he himself had once predicted Watson would enter the season as the starter, he didn't dodge the contradiction, he addressed it head-on. His explanation basically came down to ownership. The front office already sank that kind of money into Watson, and naturally, they want some return on that investment before they're willing to move on. But then he added something that genuinely stuck with me. If it were purely up to him, personally, based on nothing but football, he always wanted Shedeur to be the guy. And if Watson ends up getting the nod anyway, Hayden said he'd still be rooting for him to succeed, because at the end of the day he wants what's best for the team, even when that's not the conclusion his own football instincts led him to. Then he went a step further, and honestly, I think this is the real headline buried underneath everything else in this story. He pointed out that Watson's already had his opportunity, already been given every chance imaginable to prove what he can do out there, and in Hayden's own words, it just wasn't good enough. So now, with a younger, cheaper option sitting right there on the roster, Hayden said flatly that he's rocking with Shedeur, because you've already seen what Watson brings to the table, and it's time to find out what the other guy can actually do with a real chance. Someone pushed back on that in the moment and asked the obvious follow-up question. What if Watson simply gives this team a better chance to win games right now, separate from the whole money conversation entirely? It's a fair question, I'll give it that. But it doesn't erase what Hayden had already admitted just moments earlier. He'd essentially confirmed that the reasoning behind Watson potentially starting isn't really rooted in performance at all. It's rooted in money that's already been committed and can't be walked back. That's not a football decision dressed up as football reasoning. That's a business decision wearing a football costume, and once you hear it stated that plainly, it's genuinely hard to unhear it. Think about what it actually means when a franchise legend, somebody who spent real years inside that exact locker room, openly says he wanted the unproven rookie over the guy sitting on all the guaranteed money. That tells you something true about where the real confidence lives inside that building right now, no matter what the official messaging tries to tell you. Watson got every possible advantage a struggling franchise could hand to one player, and by Hayden's own blunt assessment, the results still stayed flat. No consistent rhythm ever developed. No real sense that things were building towards something better. And that's the hardest part for Cleveland to swallow in all of this. It's not that Watson has struggled, because injuries happen to everyone in this league, no exceptions. It's that there's no clear signal anywhere that things are actually trending upward. Let's talk honestly about the scale of that contract too, because I think people forget how enormous it actually was. This was one of the largest deals in the history of the league at the time it got signed. The kind of money that's supposed to buy stability, buy a locker room's full confidence, buy multiple years of legitimate contending football. Instead, what has Cleveland actually gotten back for that investment? Stalled drives, piling health concerns, A resume that reads more like a running list of what could have been than anything resembling the return they paid for. And Hayden didn't soften any of that when he addressed it directly. Watson wasn't playing well. Not hurt and therefore excused. Not unlucky. Just not good enough, plainly. That's a genuinely hard thing to hear about a player who was supposed to be the centerpiece of an entire rebuild, but sometimes the honest answer is the uncomfortable one, and Cleveland has run out of room to keep avoiding it. Meanwhile, Shedeur has just been sitting there this whole time, watching, absorbing every rep he could from the sideline, learning that offense inside and out, waiting patiently for his window to actually open up. And there's something almost poetic about that. Honestly, a young quarterback who's had to exercise real patience finally getting his shot at the exact moment the organization runs out of patience with the alternative sitting ahead of him. Hayden's logic here, once you strip away all the surrounding noise, is actually pretty simple. Why would you keep leaning on a player whose body and whose on-field performance have both raised legitimate, serious questions when a cheaper, hungrier option who hasn't cost the organization a single headache yet is sitting right there ready to go? That's just straightforward roster management at its core, and it's exactly the kind of reasoning that makes fans ask why this whole decision took as long as it did to actually happen. Now, here's where things get even more interesting, because Hayden wasn't the only voice pushing this narrative publicly. Derek Harrison brought up a contradiction in all of this that I don't think has gotten nearly enough attention. He pointed out that when Watson was first floated publicly as the presumed leader for the starting job, it genuinely didn't make much sense to him, unless the entire point was to light a fire under Shedeur and use it as motivation. And if that really was the intention behind it, Harrison said he could actually respect that move, because from what he's seen, Shedeur isn't the type of competitor who folds under pressure like that. He's the type who responds to a challenge by producing results, not by shrinking away from it. But then Harrison flipped the entire conversation in a direction that I think exposes the real tension sitting underneath this whole situation. If you're genuinely building for the future, he said, you actually have to build for the future. You have to go find out what you truly have on your roster, instead of clinging to pieces of the past out of loyalty or guilt or sunk cost thinking. He brought up the fact that this same organization already traded away a generational defensive talent specifically to stockpile draft capital and pivot the whole franchise toward a fresh direction. That's about as public a statement as a franchise can make about prioritizing the future over short-term comfort in the present. So his question was direct, and honestly, kind of devastating when you really sit with it. Why would that exact same organization then turn around and protect a quarterback who isn't even part of that future at all? And he didn't stop there either. No matter what happens across this entire season, this team almost certainly isn't bringing Watson back on a new contract next year unless he suddenly delivers an MVP caliber run out of nowhere, and even the front office isn't quietly operating like that's a realistic outcome. So if everyone inside that building already understands there's no long-term role here waiting for him, why does the organization keep treating this player like he's still the centerpiece of the plan going forward? That's not strategy, in Harrison's eyes. That's stubbornness dressed up to look calculated, so nobody in that front office has to publicly admit the earlier bet simply didn't pay off the way they promised it would. Sitting atop the depth chart right now with zero long-term guarantee attached beyond this single season, no firm grip on the job even heading into a genuinely critical training camp, and still soaking up reps that could otherwise be building toward the exact future this organization claims it wants. That's a strange, uncomfortable spot for Watson to be standing in. Harrison put it plainly. Cleveland doesn't actually have a clear, locked-in starter right now, and that fact alone tells you everything you need to know about where Watson really stands, regardless of whatever the outside narrative keeps trying to sell you. This doesn't feel like a locker room brimming with confidence in one guy. It feels more like a franchise quietly stalling, hoping for a turnaround that keeps refusing to arrive, while the actual alternative sits right there, fully ready for a real opportunity. And Shedeur, based on everything being said about him by the people who actually know him from inside that building, doesn't wilt the moment the spotlight gets uncomfortable. He produces under it. He competes under it. He represents the exact direction this franchise claims, out loud, that it wants to move toward Das, while the current situation surrounding Watson represents pretty much everything holding that direction back right now. And that's exactly why, at some point, I think this decision essentially starts making itself, whether the front office wants to admit it publicly or not. Cleveland already made the genuinely difficult call to move on from a generational talent purely to reset the roster and stockpile future assets for later. So why would they now hesitate to hand full control to a rookie who fits that exact same vision perfectly? Watson simply doesn't bring the long-term value this rebuild actually needs. Shedeur, at least in terms of raw potential, brings all of it. Harrison's real point underneath all of this is that if a front office keeps making emotionally driven decisions instead of clear-headed logical ones, they're going to keep spinning in the same circles instead of actually moving this organization forward. Motivational tactics can work for a stretch, sure, they can squeeze out a little extra effort here and there, but eventually every organization has to face reality head-on. Watson's window has been quietly closing for a while now, and Shedeur represents a roster that's finally actually being built around what's coming next, instead of what already happened and didn't work. So let's shift gears for a second and talk about what training camp actually looks like from here, because this is exactly where theory turns into something you can measure with your own eyes. Both quarterbacks still have to go out there and physically perform. There's no shortcut around that part, no matter how the narrative reads right now. Hayden was refreshingly clear-eyed about what he expects to see. If Shedeur keeps getting sharper in the pocket, tightens up his decision-making under pressure, and starts showing real command of that offense instead of just occasional flashes of it, Hayden genuinely believes the kid wins that job outright during camp and preseason. Full stop. And if that actually happens, the next step becomes obvious. Give him a real shot with a real offensive line in front of him, real playmakers around him, and a head coach in Todd Monken who's already said on record that he personally would have drafted Shedeur himself if given the chance. When your own head coach openly says he wanted you before you even got there, that's about as strong a public vote of confidence as any young quarterback could realistically ask for. Hayden's framing here removes almost every excuse that's been available to Shedeur up until this exact point. Real weapons around him, a real offensive line protecting him, a head coach who's publicly stated genuine belief in his ability. That's exactly what a young quarterback needs in order to show the league what he's actually capable of, whether the results end up good or bad. And Hayden made a point of saying this part directly, without hedging. From here forward, any struggles fall squarely on Shedeur and nobody else. Now flip that entire picture over to Watson, and the contrast gets uncomfortable fast. He's walking into this camp still dealing with lingering health questions that haven't fully gone away, still carrying the weight of a locker room that's already watched multiple years of inconsistent play unfold in real time right in front of them. There's no fresh narrative available for him at this point. If anything, the excuses have been quietly stacking up for several seasons now, and there's only so many times you can point towards circumstances before people around you simply stop buying it. Shedeur is getting real talent around him, genuine coaching investment, and what amounts to a legitimate opportunity for essentially the first time as a professional. Watson already had every version of that exact same setup, and by most honest accounts inside and outside that building, the results still haven't matched the investment poured into him. And here's the genuinely uncomfortable point buried inside Hayden's comments that I keep coming back to. When a young player finally gets handed every single tool needed to succeed and still can't fully separate himself on paper from a declining veteran, that says something real about how a franchise has been prioritizing comfort and sunk cost thinking over actual on-field value for far too long. Not comfortable to hear if you're sitting in that front office right now, I'm sure, but it's the kind of honest evaluation that eventually has to happen no matter how much anyone wants to keep delaying it. So here's the real question Cleveland has to sit down and answer with itself. Honestly, no spin attached. If Shedeur comes out of this camp sharp, decisive, and clearly in command of that offense, what argument is genuinely left to keep him sitting on the sideline? And if Watson, even with every conceivable advantage stacked in his favor for years now, still can't create real separation from a rookie who's never taken a single meaningful regular season snap. Why does he keep getting the benefit of the doubt handed to him over and over? If the coaching staff genuinely believes what they've already said publicly about Shedeur's ceiling, then training camp is exactly the moment to prove they actually meant it. Every practice rep from this point forward carries a weight it simply didn't carry before. Every single throw gets studied under a microscope. Every decision made in that pocket becomes part of a story Cleveland can no longer quietly avoid telling. He's got the tools now. He's got the staff's public belief behind him. He's got an opportunity that a lot of rookies never get handed this cleanly, this early, with this much support attached to it. What happens from here is genuinely on him now, and that kind of pressure tends to bring out the very best in players who are actually built for this moment, rather than crushing them under the weight of it. This is exactly the kind of moment careers end up getting defined by. Honestly, a young quarterback stepping fully into a real system, surrounded by legitimate playmakers, with a head coach who's already said publicly that he wanted him in that building from the start. That doesn't guarantee success on its own. Nothing in this league ever guarantees anything, we all know that by now, but it does remove almost every external excuse and puts the entire focus squarely on talent and preparation, which is exactly where it should be. And if the talent is real, which a lot of genuinely smart football people around that building already seem to believe it is, this is precisely the kind of setup where breakout stories tend to begin. Watson, meanwhile, keeps fading further into an uncertain role with every single week this situation continues to play out. This honestly isn't about opportunity for him anymore at this point. It's shifted much closer to pure survival, just trying to hold on to some sense of relevance on a roster that increasingly looks built entirely around someone else's future instead of his own. And that gap between what he was paid to become and what he's actually shown on the field doesn't shrink the longer this whole situation drags on. If anything, it just keeps stretching wider with every single practice that goes by. There's no hiding from film at the end of the day. There's no hiding from a locker room full of players who quietly watch everything unfold in front of them and form their own honest opinions about who's genuinely earning their role and who's simply hanging on by reputation alone. And that's exactly where this entire situation in Cleveland sits right now. A rookie stepping fully into command of an offense that's finally been built to let him actually succeed, while a veteran works overtime just to justify a role that, on pure merit alone, has become genuinely hard to defend anymore. Shedeur represents real momentum right now, in every sense of that word. He represents a fan base that's cautiously allowed itself to start believing again after years of quietly bracing for disappointment before the season has even properly started. Every clean throw becomes another piece of evidence in his favor. Every sharp decision made under real pressure adds more weight to an argument that's honestly been quietly building since the very day he first got drafted. Watson, by contrast, has slowly become something closer to a cautionary example about the danger of betting everything on reputation instead of ongoing, consistent production. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that to pile on him personally. Injuries are real, and this league is genuinely unforgiving to everyone who plays it. No exceptions. But at a certain point, the results simply speak louder than sympathy ever can. Cleveland is standing at a crossroads right now that's genuinely been building for months behind the scenes, and from everything coming out of that building lately, Shedeur appears to be walking through it with a level of confidence that has a real chance of reshaping how this entire franchise gets viewed over the next several years. Whether that actually turns into the story this whole city has been quietly hoping for, we're about to find out rep by rep, practice by practice, with absolutely nowhere left for either quarterback to hide.